Thank you very much. Our next question is on the economy. Some of you in this group have touted your business experience and private sector experience when it comes to trying to grow our economy and attract businesses that might want to move here or expand here. One of the fervent debates that's taking place both on the left and the right is this idea of giving tax breaks to businesses to move here or expand here or grow their businesses. There are people on both sides of the political aisle who argue that it's corporate welfare. Some people even argue that it's unconstitutional. At the same time, there are people who say Arizona has to do this because other states will, and other states will attract those types of businesses. So the simple question is your position on giving tax breaks to some of the largest corporations in this country. Mr. Ducey.
Thank you. This is the economic development and growth of this state will be a real focus of mine, and I think we have a real opportunity here. I'm generally opposed to subsidies. I think we have a great state in which to present out, and I'm just curious, how many people in the crowd here tonight were born somewhere other than the state of Arizona? I always like to ask that question. I always say thank you to the natives for a great state in which to move. But I think if you look at the statistics, you will see that we've been a state that has led the nation in population growth. My challenge would be, why have we not led the nation in reflective economic development, job creation, and business relocation? I think we need to present our state out for what it is, a welcoming place, which is very good to do business. I talked in the first question about improving our tax code, lightening regulation, and lowering liability and litigation on the taxpayer. That's a way to attract business. That's a way to allow business that's here to thrive. But the next thing I'd like to do is get at the table. I come from the business community. I'm very comfortable talking to decision makers and leaders and influencers. I believe Rick Perry has done a great job of this for the state of Texas. Rick Perry's retiring at the end of this year. I think we have a superior product to Texas. I'd like to woo these businesses from Arizona and Illinois. I do think we have to have some things in our back pocket, some tools to do that. But my experience in the private sector is most business that's won on price is lost on price. Let's sell the great attributes of our state.
Time's up. Thank you. Mr. Duvall.
I'd like to begin. Arizona has suffered a reputational damage in the last couple of years. Policy issues like 1070, 1062, which have become spectacles, and the sort of recurring nature of Arizona getting on the comedy shows and becoming a spectacle is not helpful to our business climate. So number one is getting back to presenting Arizona as an inclusive, tolerant place that's open for business and where everyone will feel welcome to bring their talents to full fruition in the state of Arizona. Secondly, Arizona is a small business state. This is a state where if we want to nurture what we're best at, it's creating the entrepreneurial environment that has led to so many startups. We're going to grow the next great companies in Arizona, have a much better chance of doing that than trying to recruit them to Arizona. That requires narrow and smart tax policy that nurtures the small business incubation between the start and the growth, so that those small businesses, women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, and others can get started and get to the critical mass in years 2 and 3. But third, and we go back to this most important, businesses will come here and grow here if they can hire smart, skilled workforce. And unless we fix this education funding and standards and productivity problem, we will not have the kind of business growth that we all aspire to and that I know that every Arizonan wants for the next generation and the jobs that will come their way.
Thank you, Mr. Duvall. Mr. Hess.
Well, I think the number one problem that any of us is going to face, no matter what we think or say or do, is going to be the economy. We're in the midst of a depression, and there's no such thing as a jobless recovery. So we've got to stimulate jobs. Everything in politics is interrelated. And part of my plan to stimulate business is to give the business people a stable environment, tax-wise and regulation-wise, to eliminate as many of the unnecessary regulations that have inhibited so many startups would be a major step. But also, I proposed a 4% on the gross corporate veil protections fee for corporations if they want to seek the protections of the corporate veil. 4% on the gross, that's it. We don't need regulators. They can get rid of the accountants. The whole game starts to change in that atmosphere rather than trying to bribe specific companies with tax subsidies or tax annulments, which is ridiculous. At the same time, part of it is I plan to eliminate the personal income and private property tax, which not only is it a moral issue, you can't steal from people just because you've got a larger group with guns. The whole point is that that will put so much money back into our economy and force existing businesses to expand, and new businesses will want to come here to a stable political and tax environment. I think that's essential to what we're doing. We can't tell businesses to grow, we can allow them to grow, and basically it all comes down to getting government out of the way and stop trying to allow politicians who have no experience.
Time's up.
Sorry.
Ms. Jones, your position, tax breaks to attract business.
Yeah, economic development, clearly the key to the ongoing growth of the state. When we got here in the 90s, I joined a little law firm, and then in late 2001 got recruited to go to this tiny little startup company with the crazy name GoDaddy. And so we had a little bit of this notion of what's the right thing for the government to do. In our experience, going from just a few dozen employees to about 4,000, it was just for the government to get out of our way. I don't hear many people talking about this, but as to corporate welfare, I'm not in favor of it. What I do think might work as a CPA is for us to incentivize based on net new revenue. And we don't have to pick losers and winners. What we can do is incentivize based on that, whether you're in Arizona or you're out of Arizona. The level playing field is the way for us to go. What we really should focus on, though, because the state is barely meeting its obligations as it is how do you generate more revenue? And even conservatives have fallen prey to the notion that the only way to do that is to raise income taxes. It's not. It's the opposite. You set the playing field for organizations in the private sector to create jobs. More jobs leads to more taxpayers. More taxpayers leads to lower taxes for everybody. That's accretive to the state. It's good for all of the revenue generation, and it doesn't require this corporate welfare and this notion of waiving taxes and picking. And by the way, to the state of New York, where they give 10 years of free taxes, I would say to finish this answer, you would have to give 10 free years of taxes because nobody would go to upstate New York otherwise.
Thank you. Mr. Riggs.
Well, I'm a small businessman, been a small business owner with my wife, my partner, for going on 3 decades. So I know what it's like to sign, in real estate and outdoor advertising, so I know what it's like to sign both sides of a paycheck, meet a payroll with your heart in your throat. And as a member of Congress, I earned the Guardian of Small Business Award from the NFIB, National Federation of Independent Business, America's leading voice for small business, for my actual voting record. I don't favor corporate welfare, and I think Scott Smith and I have an honest intellectual disagreement. I don't think it was necessary to give Apple property tax breaks at a time when they were buying back $38 billion worth of their stock. I think employers look for an educated workforce, educated, motivated workforce. They look for a high quality of life, affordable housing, good infrastructure. Those are all things that we need to focus on and where government can partner with the private sector. But to finish the point, I think 95% of Arizona businesses are small businesses, and I dare say that also applies to the majority of membership of the Arizona Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. I want government to partner with small business, streamline permit processing, keep bureaucratic red tape to an absolute minimum. And I want to go through the tax code, get rid of all the corporate welfare and the special interest tax breaks, and by closing those loopholes, use the savings to reduce both individual and business income taxes.
Mr. Riggs. Mr. Smith.
I absolutely believe that paying incentives to lure business is a fool's errand. I don't support it. And as a matter of fact, we didn't pay Apple. But the reality is that companies don't come here. The reason it's a fool's errand, they don't come here because of what check. They come here because we decide to be in the game. And that's not a game that we can win long run, that we can win in the long run. You know, we talked about, Rick Perry's been brought up here. You want to know how Texas brings a lot of business in? They buy it. $19 billion paid out by the state of Texas over the last 5 years. That's $1 billion. They're the New York Yankees. Now, how can Arizona compete? Well, we can. We do it in a way that we did in the city of Mesa. I think I'm the only one up here that's actually been in the position to direct an economic development activity from the government side. to sit down across the table from the Apples and the other companies who are trying to get things. And what they want to do is that first and foremost, they want to be in a place they can succeed. And they can succeed when tax policy is rational and fair, but mostly where government provides them a framework where they can succeed. We did it in Mesa through a little program called Facilitate, Don't Regulate. Yeah, it sounds simple. It is simple. Our job was to help people succeed as opposed to telling them no. That especially worked with small businesses. Facilitate, don't regulate. Apple and small business came up to us and they said they'd never experienced a change like that. That's how you make government business friendly. That's how you set the stage and plow the field for businesses and private investment to foster. You have the attitude of facilitate, don't regulate.
Time's up.
It will work, it can work.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas.
Well, I'm not a supporter of corporate welfare. I think that the way to grow our economy is to keep taxes and regulations low, particularly compared to states that we're competing with, continue to make Arizona a wonderful place in which to live and pursue happiness. And I also think that when we're talking about economy and jobs, we can't forget about the elephant in the room, and it needs to be dealt with. And it is the fact that illegal immigrants are stealing jobs from Americans. It is happening hundreds of thousands of times. And that is the reality. And somebody needs to speak truth to the power in the White House and throughout this country that is allowing this to happen. Just this week, the Center for Immigration Studies came out with a new report that showed that all jobs created in the United States since 2000, that's 3 presidential administrations, Clinton, Bush, and Obama, all jobs created during that period have been taken by legal and illegal immigrants. All of them. Talk about a jobless economy, these jobs are being stolen. And our taxes are unnecessarily high because we're having to pay for the costs associated with people who are breaking into our state unlawfully. These are difficult facts for many of us to confront, but they are facts. And we need a leader who is willing to address it and deal with it decisively, and that's what I'll do as governor.
Please. Please refrain from applause, outbursts, and other emotional responses. Ironically, our next question is on immigration. I'm sorry. I forgot Ken Bennett. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I do not support tax breaks as a way to bring economic development to our state. Doing it that way, I think, is like what I call a lasso approach. We hear about some company and we're going to throw a rope around them and try to pull them into Arizona. And as has been mentioned on the panel, the next state, before or after us, is usually there with a much bigger checkbook than we have. And so I think we need to look at economic development not as a lasso approach, trying to get 1 or 2 to come here. We need to create a magnet or a vacuum situation where companies want to come here. I can remember a couple of years ago at an economic development forum in Chandler. And I was explaining the state budget with my Kleenex boxes, and the next gentleman was talking about how they were trying to get as many as possible of the 300 companies they had identified were leaving California that year to come to Arizona. And I'm sure they were doing everything they could and promising whatever tax breaks they could, but only 1 of 300 came to Arizona. And they started talking about the states that they were going to. And yes, some of it is states where they're buying that business. But I think there are 4 focuses for economic development to create that vacuum or that magnet approach. One is the cost of doing business in Arizona, constantly looking at our tax code and making sure that we are attractive compared to other states. A close second is talent. Our schools and universities and community colleges and technical schools producing the kind of talent that is going to help make those businesses successful, and the ones that are already growing and starting here. Third is time, all the bureaucracy and red tape. And 4th is the image of our state. Those are the 4 things we need to stay focused on.
Thank you so much.